Hey everybody, and welcome to our presentation, Keys to the Kingdom, an analysis of ransomware and access trends in 2023. So before we get started, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Ashley, and I'm a senior intelligence analyst here at Intel 471, and with me today is Beth, an Intel Fusion specialist. So over the course of this presentation, we'll start broad and then kind of narrow down into some more specific examples. More broadly, we'll discuss common methods used by threat actors to gain access to a system before we dive into a case study of an actual access vendor. From there, we'll discuss two prominent groups from 2023, Lockbit and Clop, and round out today's talk with predictions for 2024, some mitigation methods, and then, of course, leave some time for questions. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. Since this presentation is TLP clear, we did replace some actor names with pseudonyms, and then also there is an area in the platform for you to submit questions, so please do so along the course of the presentation, and we will try to answer them, or as many of them as we can at the very, very end. And so with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and get started.
Hey, so for a ransomware attack to take place, the actor first needs to gain access to a system. So how do they do this? There are many TTPs used by the actors, and the most common are shown here on the screen. So there's social engineering, such as phishing emails, relying on the end user to click a link to download malware. Business email compromise, tricking someone into divulging confidential company information. Or the most recent surge we saw in 2023 was quishing, getting people to scan a QR code which leads to a malicious site. There's RDP compromise, where an attacker uses RDP to remote into a system and deploy ransomware. CVE exploitation, which, as the title suggests, CVE, common vulnerabilities exposure, where an actor hones in on a weakness in a system that can be exploited. Infostealer logs, a list of username and passwords stolen through malware which can be found on the underground. And lastly, purchasing from access vendors. This is the access type we're looking further into in this presentation. So what is an access vendor? Overall, Intel 471 identifies an initial access broker to be made up of four characteristics. They are, number one, opportunistic. These actors will identify any relevant opportunities to exploit victims that can make them money or provide them with status. This status is also known as their reputation, which is the second characteristic. These actors rely on a strong reputation in the underground so that their listings for sales are taken seriously. Third, valid offerings. These also contribute to an actor's reputation, and invalid offerings can have a negative impact, making other actors less likely to purchase from them. And when it comes to potential buyers, access vendors try to form long-standing partnerships, characteristic number 4, in order to gain continuous customers and broker bulk deals for larger sums of money. In 2023, we here at Intel 471 introduced new terminology to better differentiate the types of accesses sold in the underground by these access vendors. These two categories are wholesale access and specified access. While both offer purported access to a network, resource, or service by means of compromised access credentials, exploitation of a software vulnerability, or misconfiguration, wholesale access is where no indicator exists that a threat actor verified the validity of access as operational. Wholesale accesses are typically sold in bulk offerings, and actors who offer wholesale access likely source them from malware logs or purchase them from others who are likely reselling captured data. Specified access is where there is an indication that a threat actor verified the validity of the access as operational. Specified access is typically sold individually or in small batches with a layer of quality assurance over it. While wholesale access offers continually outnumber specified access, quantity does not necessarily equal quality or significance. On the other hand, threat actors offering specified access appear to have the ability to carry out a variety of reconnaissance efforts, develop and obtain tools and malware, and occasionally maintain their foothold, move laterally, or exfiltrate an array of data from compromised networks. Many access offerings follow a typical structure when posted on cybercriminal forums. These offerings often do not state the victim, likely in order to provide some sort of operational security and not immediately alert the victim giving threat actors the time to complete the sale and create a barrier for law enforcement tracking and notifications. Instead, actors often post the industry and annual revenue of the victim organisation, along with the type of access for sale. This fake offering here shows a start price of $500, and each bid will increase by $100 every time someone comments. The word blitz is the same as a buy now, which is often significantly higher. In this instance, it's $1,200, and we have observed this to be a common buy now price for access to an individual organisation. On the screen, you can see the auction will end 5 hours after the last bid. Typically, this time frame can range, with 12 hours or a day being a common choice. Once this time has elapsed, the actor with the highest offer has won the bid. Here's an actor who we assess as a specified access broker, and for the purpose of this webinar, we will call Bram. Why Bram? Bram's a cat who belongs to a member of our team. So Bram was a member of the Exploit Forum from October 2020 to September 2023, with no observed reason for leaving. Bram is still an active member of XSS and joined here in February 2023 with 45 posts so far. Digging into the forum posts and comments from Bram, we've been able to recognise trends and TTPs of the actor. In summary, Bram purchases very specific access to computer networks from initial access vendors, tests these accesses, and then sells them on to ransomware actors. Bram is a broker. The actor appears to be impartial to which access vendors they purchase from, preferring to check all the offers themselves and bidding on only the ones they find the most valuable. Due to this, there is a long list of possible associated actors. They have a preference for targeting entities in the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and Europe, and they state they do not want to purchase access to government entities, hospitals, clinics, schools, or universities. Bram uses external-facing remote services, RDP, VPN, and more for initial access. They create additional accounts within networks to maintain persistent remote access. Bram uses Cobalt Strike payloads to maintain initial access and PowerShell for network reconnaissance. They prefer to check the accesses before purchasing and use Zoom info services for gathering information on possible impacted entities. Bram also possibly used the Zero Logon exploit for a lateral infection based on forum advertisement. The average price paid for access by Bram was $1,200, but the prices do vary from $200 to $10,000. We also know that Bram operates ransomware of unknown origin, disables antivirus software prior to deploying ransomware, and possibly also used underground call services for facilitating ransomware attacks. On the contrary to Bram's specific tested access, we assessed the most prolific ransomware strain of 2023, Lockbit 3.0, and its affiliates to gain access by other means, including purchasing wholesale access. So as mentioned, in 2023, for the second year running, Lockbit 3.0 was the most deployed ransomware variant globally, with 980 victims. For comparison, the graph here shows the second most deployed Alpha V with 430 victims, Clop 382, Play 319, and 8base with 206 victims. The top 3 countries impacted by Lockbit 3.0 were US, UK, and France, and their most targeted industries were industrial products and services, engineers and construction, and retail, wholesale and distribution. The Lockbit 3.0 ransomware strain was deployed by many affiliates, meaning the TTPs vary significantly between attacks. Some observed initial access techniques used by affiliates are phishing and spear phishing, exploiting RDP, valid accounts, which is obtaining and abusing credentials of existing accounts, drive-by compromise, so gaining access to a system through a user visiting a website over the normal course of browsing, and exploiting public-facing applications. Looking at 2023 victim data specifically, there was evidence of Lockbit 3.0 affiliates purchasing access from a well-known access vendor who we will dub as Cookie, another pet of an Intel 471 member, this time a goat. So in August 2023, the operator or operators behind the Lockbit 3.0 Ransomware as a Service affiliate program claimed the compromise of a Qatar-based engineering and construction company. Earlier in the same month, we reported the access vendor Cookie offered to sell access to 152 compromised accounts, which included credentials impacting the same victim entity. Within the same batch, 2 more victim entities, a university and a recycling plant, were offered for sale by Cookie and impacted by Lockbit shortly thereafter. Monitoring Cookie's offerings, we assess the actor as a wholesale vendor, as they commonly sell large batches of credentials sourced from malware logs. Although it is possible both actors source the same credentials independently from one another, based on our analysis of the actor's behaviour, it is likely operators of Lockbit directly purchased the access from Cookie. Looking ahead to 2024, Lockbit has had a challenging start to the year, with their main administrator being banned from the XSS and Exploit forum following a complaint from a wholesale access vendor, claiming Lockbit SUP was a scammer and refusing to pay for accesses provided by them. Since the actor now has scammer or ripper status, this could significantly disrupt their ability to continue to purchase from access vendors, which could affect Lockbit's impact this year. But as the situation is relatively new, only time will tell on that one. Another notable access technique used by Lockbit in 2023 was the exploitation of CVE 2023-4966, also known as Citrix Bleed. Citrix Bleed is an improper restriction of operations within the bounds of a memory buffer vulnerability, impacting multiple versions of Citrix Application Delivery Controller and Citrix Gateway. An exploit was observed in open source and a link to a POC was shared in the underground. Successful exploitation would grant an attacker the capability to take over previously authenticated sessions effectively, bypassing multi-factor authentication and any other stringent authentication safeguards in use. In November 2023, the New York-based subsidiary of the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China fell victim to a ransomware attack. The incident disrupted the US Treasury market trading, where ICBC serves as a broker for hedge funds and other market participants, reportedly causing issues in equities clearing. A few days after the attack, a representative of the Lockbit 3.0 Ransomware as a Service group confirmed the group's responsibility for the attack via the TOX messaging application, in response to an inquiry by the user VX Underground on the X, formerly known as Twitter, platform. Officials from the US Treasury confirmed the Citrix Bleed vulnerability was exploited during the compromise. Lockbit also allegedly leveraged CVE 2023-27350, which is an improper access control vulnerability impacting paper-cut software to gain initial access. Reports also mention that this vulnerability was used by Clop. So I'll pass it back to Ashley to discuss more vulnerabilities exploited by the Clop ransomware gang.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so on May 31st last year, Progress Software issued a security advisory to address a critical vulnerability impacting multiple versions of its MoveIt transfer software. The vulnerability is a structured query language injection, or SQLI vulnerability, that allows remote attackers to gain unauthorized access to the MoveIt transfer database and execute arbitrary code with system privileges. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and Progress Software reported active exploitation of the vulnerability in the wild. On June 5th, security researchers at Microsoft attributed the exploitation to the Clop ransomware group. 4 days later, Progress Software released a security advisory for another critical SQLI vulnerability in MoveIt transfer that could allow an attacker to gain unauthenticated access by submitting a malicious payload to an application endpoint, leading to modification and disclosure of database content. 5 days after that, a POC was shared on Twitter, or X. The next day, Progress Software issued a security advisory for yet another SQLI vulnerability impacting MoveIt transfer that could result in escalated privileges and potential unauthorized access to the affected environment. On July 6th, Progress Software disclosed 3 additional vulnerabilities affecting various versions of MoveIt transfer. On the same day that Microsoft attributed the exploitation to Clop, which was June 5th, the group claimed responsibility for the attacks on MoveIt transfer. The group announced it actually began to exploit the vulnerability at the end of May during the U.S. Memorial Day holiday. The following day, Clop published a statement on its extortion website asserting it successfully exploited the Move It vulnerability and stole data from, quote, hundreds of organizations. The group also set a June 14th deadline for the affected organizations to contact it and start negotiations. The group chose to exclude government agencies, municipal services, and police departments from their ransom demands. On July 19th, Clop announced its intent to publish stolen data on dedicated clear websites, mimicking a tactic previously seen by the Alpha ransomware gang. On August 5th, Clop shifted its strategy once more, opting to use torrents to distribute stolen data. The group initially released their victim files in pieces, but transitioned to a single direct torrent link, which offers multiple advantages over more traditional file hosting methods. Since torrents rely on a decentralized approach, multiple users can simultaneously download and share parts of the file with others. This method leads to both quicker downloads and broader file dissemination. Also, there is no central server that can be shut down to stop file distribution, which makes it more challenging for law enforcement or other entities to quickly halt that activity. So, as a result, the risk to targeted organizations escalates as more individuals may potentially have access to the stolen data. The Clap Group likely adopted this tactic to intensify pressure on victims to meet their ransom demands. To facilitate this new distribution strategy, Clap established a new Tor site providing instructions on how to access the leaked data and offering magnet links for the affected organizations. Fast forwarding to August 10th, the group used its extortion website to issue a new threat, warning it would release data from companies that did not engage in negotiations by August 15th. The group claimed it would publish stolen data on both the ClearWeb and Tor and promised to create a ClearWeb URL for larger companies to, quote, help Google index your data. True to its word, Clop began to release victim names on its website in batches starting on August 15th. All of this goes to show how the Clop ransomware group has evolved since its debut in February 2019. The group initially was involved in large scale phishing campaigns and used verified and digitally signed binaries to bypass system defenses. The group often deployed its ransomware alongside the Get2Loader and SDB bot remote access tool, or RAT, as part of its infection chain. And then in more recent campaigns, starting in 2021, the group shifted its focus from encryption to data exfiltration. In late 2020 and 2021, Clop exploited vulnerabilities in Excelion's file transfer appliance to steal data from about 100 companies. The group also exploited an RCE vulnerability in ServView MFT and ServView Secure File Transfer Protocol software. Then, following a relatively quiet 2022, Clop's activity surged in 2023. So, in February of 2023, the group exploited a vulnerability in Fortre's Go Anywhere MFT platform and impacted up to 130 victims, meaning that the Move It campaign we just talked about was actually Clop's second major operation targeting file transfer software in 2023 alone. These campaigns targeting Excelion, Go Anywhere, and Move It reveal some consistent tactics. In each case, the group exploited zero-day vulnerabilities in file transfer platforms and chose to exfiltrate data instead of deploying ransomware for encryption. Therefore, Clock was able to execute attacks quicker and potentially compromise more victims. While previously known for double extortion tactics, Clop is also known to use very aggressive extortion methods, including sending extortion emails to victims' clients, partners, operating a victim name and shame blog, and releasing victim payment card data. The group's consistent exploitation of zero-day vulnerabilities in widely used file transfer software indicates sophisticated in-house capabilities. Such a strategy ensures higher attack success rates since companies generally are unprepared to counteract zero-day threats. Additionally, it indicates the group doesn't target just any vulnerability, but specifically those that exist in systems likely to host valuable data, such as MFTs. The group demonstrated capability by changing its MO to increase efficiency. It shifted from leveraging data encryption to exfiltration and public exposure, from establishing initial contact to making victims initiate contact, and towards decentralized and swifter data dissemination techniques like torrents. The Clap ransomware group exhibits a high level of sophistication. It is strategic, adaptive, resourceful, and clearly inclined to target high value entities and sectors. Its choice of vulnerabilities to exploit, combined with changing tactics and the scale of operations, positions the group as one of the more advanced in the modern ransomware landscape. Moreover, the group's continued success might signal the potential for an increase in comparable attacks in the near future, with more threat actors trying to mirror Clop's tactics. So, Along the lines of looking ahead to 2024, it's key to mention that ransomware remained a critical threat in 2023. Attacks continued at an alarming rate, marked by a near 90% increase in victims and numerous high profile incidents throughout the year. We also saw a marked increase in ransomware variants in 2023, likely due to the widespread availability of ransomware. Accessibility makes it easier for attackers with limited skill levels to participate in this area of cybercrime. Additionally, as some larger RAS groups get disrupted, we always see a numerous smaller groups kind of pop up in their place. So the growing number of ransomware strains, partnered with the sustained access of well-established strains, implies that it's highly likely that the frequency of attacks will persist in an upward trajectory as we progress into 2024. Within the scope of access, social engineering kept growing this year, one of the methods Beth was talking about earlier, which did result in some sizable breaches. So, ransomware actors will almost certainly continue taking advantage of the most complicated and persistent security weakness any organization has, which is its people. So, in all likelihood, the primary delivery method will still remain phishing emails, and those will continue to improve as AI chatbots keep improving what those campaign lures look like. A big trend we've also observed in 2022 actually was the sourcing of accesses from malware logs. This continued through 2023 as InfoSealer use continued to surge. It's also highly likely that the bulk sales of access credentials will continue to increase in 2024, but it's also likely that ransomware actors will continue to simply source these malware logs for themselves, which may force some access vendors to have to obtain more unique initial access via first stage malware payloads or vulnerability exploitation. As we said last year, threat actors are willing to pivot to new techniques that work and to pivot away from techniques that are no longer financially lucrative. In 2024, that trend will almost certainly continue, and we will see threat actors shift their TTPs to align with whatever methods gain them the most profitable accesses possible. Unfortunately, potential victims are unlikely to become fully immune to attacks. However, they can learn to mitigate the impact more effectively through better securing confidential data and creating proper backup and incident response plans. Further mitigations might include monitoring for accesses being sold in the underground, not only for your organization, but for other organizations you have used as vendors or organizations that you could be affiliated with as third parties. We would also recommend setting up monitoring in your company for vendors you use, such as Citrix, along with your sector and industry. As Beth showed earlier in this talk, often actors don't always necessarily call out the company name specifically, but they do post the industry, size, and revenue along with access type. You would also want to monitor for vulnerabilities targeting these exact same systems. Tying into that point, you should minimize and monitor your third party access. You should also do things like require multi factor authentication and one time passwords. You should configure your system permissions. You should routinely update software and patch your vulnerabilities. Again, keeping awareness around vulnerabilities actively being exploited. You should reduce your third party infrastructure data storage. You should engage in user data transfer analysis. And of course, as always, enforce strong password policies. So that's going to start to wrap up our talk here today. I do want to give a shout out to Bram and Cookie for standing in as two prolific access brokers for the purposes of our talk today. We appreciate them standing in as pseudonyms. We do also want to give a shout out to Otis and Tater. We couldn't leave our own dogs out, of course. So here they are standing in as Lockbit and Clop. So that does wrap up our talk for you. So we just want to thank you for spending your time with us. I also, of course, want to open up the floor to questions. If we don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to Beth or myself on LinkedIn or reach out to a point of contact here at Intel 471 if you have one. And if you don't, you can always contact us at the email address you see up on the screen here. So with that, I will go ahead and open the floor to any questions. So just one second as I read the ones that come in here. Okay, so it does look like we have a couple that have come in. So the first one is, what is the most common way access vendors gain their access? So this is a good question. So this is what we were saying earlier. It does depend on the access vendor themselves. More and more, as Beth said, we are seeing those wholesale vendors, which are actors who scrape InfoStealer malware logs and just sell the credentials of interest. But as I was saying, many ransomware actors can just do the same thing themselves. So the interesting accesses, for lack of a better term there, sit with the specified vendors. Those are those actors who exhibit a level of sophistication to gain unique credentials. So this is typically accomplished via active scanning tools or exploiting vulnerabilities. So some active scanning tools could be ISPY or ISPy, Mass Scan, Nmap, and Soft Perfect, for example. And then on the vulnerability front, these actors are often leveraging structured query language injection and remote code execution vulnerabilities to try and gain access to target networks and databases. So, good question there. Um, it looks like we have another one that is how can you prove that RAS operators are using access brokers to gain network access? Yeah, so as we've mentioned throughout this presentation, it can be tough to identify if a ransomware operator is directly purchasing from an access vendor, especially if those purchases are happening privately or in private chats, of course. But we can assess relationships between actors in a few ways. So we can correlate access sold with later ransomware victims. As I mentioned, this can be a loose assessment at best, especially if the access was simply scraped from an InfoStealer malware log. Who's to say that the ransomware operator didn't just simply source from the same file, right? So as Beth mentioned, we can supplement that with, analysis of actor behavior. And then also with specified accesses, the connection can be made with a little bit of a higher degree of confidence because, the best ways are, of course, observing direct communication between actors or even better through linking payments between entities. So we kind of take all those factors into consideration before we make an assessment. So great question. I think we probably have time for maybe one more here. So it looks like someone did ask, you mentioned that CLOP has used double extortion. What is that? Also a great question. So just to be clear, CLOP is far from the only group that uses this technique. Double extortion is something that we are seeing more and more ransomware or data exfiltration groups use. So, quite simply, once the ransomware operator is in the system, they basically locate high value assets and then exfiltrate them to their own storage network. So, at this point, the data is exfiltrated, but it's not yet held for ransom. The user at this point is unaware of a data leak, typically. So afterwards, the threat actor encrypts the data and demands a ransom, the more traditional, ransomware attack. So at this point, the victim is aware of the attack because the note is on their screen usually. But if the ransom's not paid, the actors will often sell the stolen data or publish it on public blogs or online forums. So these victims are being extorted not only to be able to decrypt their files, but secondly, to prevent a leak. So that's kind of the twofold aspect there of double extortion. So I hope that one makes sense. So yeah, that's basically going to wrap up the time that we have today. Again, feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions or comments. Thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out with us. It's really appreciated. We know a lot of folks lead very busy lives and careers, so taking a half hour to spend with us always means a lot. We hope you all learned something here or found it interesting if you knew everything already. But hopefully we will see you next time. So thank you so much and goodbye, everybody.